Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the second episode of Clickbait. So, I was kind of debating this time around, because it seems like this episode was almost roughly 50 minutes, so it's just kind of I know I was going to say that I was going to, put, two episodes and kind of back-to-back them, but I kind of felt also there's a lot going on in this one episode to where I was just okay, I think I'd be better off just kind of going into this one episode just talking about it. I think the episodes might just be long enough, or there might be enough in here to just really focus on one episode. Because it seems like we're really focusing on the detective in this episode, or Rashawn Miri. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So, I guess I had ill-pronounced, of course, Pia's name, because I don't know, I guess I didn't hear it enough in the first episode, so I really just didn't have any never mind about it. But a lot of people were hey, you pronounced this girl's name wrong. Oh well, it's always bound to happen. Really, if to always ever incorrectly say something, oh well. Through one episode, at least I didn't do the whole season, and I was calling her a different name, Pie or whatever, the whole entire time. So okay, because anyways, it's just more just focused upon Rashawn in this episode, or Roshan. Anyways, so really, this episode, really to me, I was just okay, so they're really just slowing this thing down, and they are, I can understand probably why now it's to be called clickbait. It's just okay, so there's some starts and stops to this episode where supposedly they are to find this guy already. And yeah, so there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of false calls. There's a lot of false accusations and false whatever. So they have to build a bizarrish app thing to have supposedly tracked down this guy Nick's whereabouts in this episode. And so they had to build a whole entire app around trying to find where this guy is, unless this app actually exists, then whatever. But it seems that the detective, by the end of this episode, can maybe quite possibly figure out who might be tied to the disappearance of Nick. But I'm assuming that's probably going to go a lick of nowhere, because everything is just kind of hey, how can we get people interested in the next episode? How can we get people interested in the next episode? And so on and so forth. Going into this one, it seems we get a thorough, in-depth, kind of microscopic look at Rashawn's life, and get to find out that seemingly this character has a certain kind of family that is to be proud of their son, and is to just kind of be asking him hey, when are you going to get a homicide, especially after this whole case wraps, because this is a pretty big case, you're on the news and so on and so forth. But a lot of the coverage is to basically say that cops have no clue what they're doing or are clueless. We have certain people that are kind of texting just saying people don't know what they're doing. Obviously these police officers have no clue what they're doing. We have in this episode that instead of going out and finding Nick really through this episode, a lot of times they're to immediately start accusing every single thing of both Pia and Sophie and their family, to want to take every single cell phone away from every one of this family to see if any bit of it could connect to Nick somehow or another. And Pia was to have a story where she didn't actually tell to the police officers. It seems that there was a lot of stuff that Pia didn't exactly tell this detective, which would to be possibly lead to maybe Nick's disappearance, which eventually is to be told a little bit later on. So, in this episode. So really there's to be some stretching out here. Like this movie or this show, I mean, I always say movie before because I do more movies than shows. This thing is to kind of trickle out kind of like The Missing, where or just kind of like a show that kind of feels that they're taking forever in one episode to do one thing. And so like the first episode goal was to like take an entire episode to get to 5 million views. The second goal for this episode is to supposedly find where Nick is, dead or alive or otherwise. And so that's what the real goal is for this episode, to find this character. And eventually they take an entire episode to do that. So, like, I guess every episode is to have a goal. So, like, I guess, like, that's a way to write an episode. Just like, hey, just have one idea of one episode and take forever through one character to figure out how to achieve that one set goal. And I'm assuming that there's probably going to be entire episodes where there's probably going to need flashbacks being done to stretch this out even more. So I'm seeing that this show is actually a really big stretch of time. So it's just like, wow, so this is really playing to the clickbait thing where it's like, how long can we stretch out an episode for, like, so I'm like, okay, so now I'm starting to understand what this really means. So now I'm starting to understand what this show is about. So without a doubt, like, man, this was a really long stretch of a thing. If people are still fascinated by this review after this, like, I'll keep going along with it. But I'm like, man, like, this show just, like, really stretches its time and is to really just, like, have some false things or just to have a lot of stuff with these characters that is to just stretch the crap out of this story. But we also find out that Rashawn evidently had some previous ties with Pia. It seems that Rashawn was to be on this dating app and was to message Pia to kind of see if they could go out and get a drink or whatever. And like that didn't lead to really anything. But eventually it seems like they are spending quite a bit of time together in this episode. So who really knows? Probably after this case to be solved, maybe Rashawn is to eventually end up with Pia. Who really knows? So yeah. With that said, I think I'm going to go out of my way to say it's about that coveted time again to go into the spoiler territory to call this a day. So spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode. So they tell us right away that this episode is to be focused on the detective or Rashawn. Like it, they cover his family. They cover the fact that he is an ex husband with child. So they cover all of that, and they kind of cover that it seems that Rashawn probably doesn't have enough time for his kid. But he tells his kid that he loves him and smooches and whatever. So most of what is covered by his family is his family just being like, "Hey, you're on TV." Like they obviously say that you're cops that are clueless, but hey, like you're on TV. We also have a point where Rashawn is kind of just upset with his detectives, and they're upset with him for the right reasons. Like, all of them are starting to give him crap because they end up finding out that he's on a dating app, and they plaster all these pictures of him all over his own desk to give him crap. And then eventually, the senior detective to him, Rashawn, is just going after him like, "Why do you hate me so much?" And it's just because, hey, like every other detective has been working 24 hours to get this case solved. And what are you doing? Like, what are you really doing here? And so, like, his superior is to be like, don't ever talk to me like that. Like, I've been here a lot longer than you have. Don't be talking to me like this. So, So Rashawn is, through a lot of this episode, to consistently get parts where supposedly someone had mentioned that this guy Nick had been found. And so there has been like a spot where somebody had said that this guy Nick had been found, to eventually just find that there's a mannequin there instead of actually Nick. And so like I guess there was a prank being pulled, and so Pia and Rashawn were going out to eventually find this body, and it was actually just a lie or a fabrication to have a picture on the face of a mannequin. And then there was a lot of people that just say, "Hey, I thought we were helping," like when you guys were just finding a mannequin. So, backing this up a little, so the detectives go through Sophie's house, getting everyone's phones, and so they end up finding that, or Sophie ends up making a statement to go to the news with this, and so the police are kind of telling her what to say and how to act and whatever, how to basically perform in front of the cameras. So there evidently were no demands made. There were no nothing to just justify whichever. So we eventually have here that Pia is to have not told Rashawn that it seemed that Nick had got into a fight. It looked like it. She couldn't specify or whatever. Plus, also, Pia and Nick were to get into a fight also, and Pia didn't want to tell Rashawn about that either, but Nick had left a message kind of mentioning that things aren't going exactly like perfect right now. And Rashawn is like, "Why didn't you give me this message?" And Pia was like, "Well, like you guys were already like conspiring to think that Nick is doing something wrong. Like this basically just put fuel to the fire. Give me that one out of this. Woo, yeah, freaking Metallica." Anyways, uh, so we have consistent moments where Rashawn is going through this app because there's an app to show where Nick has previously been. And I guess they naturally assume that there was to be an app, I guess, with this guy's phone that could tell him everywhere that this guy has been. So they kind of are triangulating and trying to find out where Nick is. And they assess or assume that any of these locations are to tell them exactly where Nick is. So everyone is looking for this body through this bizarre app. So Rashawn is going through this location and searching for Nick, supposedly, to not be able to find Nick. And so eventually, towards the very tail end of this episode, eventually they do find Nick. The very beginning of this episode is to, of course, have these people find this van that Nick was supposedly in, open it up with this whole like SWAT team and everybody there, all these detectives, to find that there was nothing in this van. There was no camera, there was no nothing. I guess they didn't dust it for prints or anything like that. They just found this van empty. So while everyone is to go and grab all of Sophie's family's phones and all of anybody's family that's tied to Nick, Pia is to tell Rashawn that, hey, like, I heard after the first, like, 2 days of not finding somebody, like, the chances of being able to find this person drops 50%. The guy's like, well, technically that is correct, but, like, there is still a possibility. So Pia is to find her brother's son going on this app and like seeing that people are trying to search for him. And a lot of the comments are like, dude, this guy is dead. Like, obviously, this guy, we're going to find him in a body bag somewhere. Like, this guy's dead. So, certain people are texting this guy, like, asking, like, hey, is there any updates? And it's like, dude, people are freaking clueless. It's like, well, hey, let me know. Like, yeah, you're. So, Pia is to eventually go on and so Roshan is to go to his superior and tell her that's like, hey, I just want to let you know, me and Pia were on a dating app, and like, and so his detective, or so his superior is like, well, you slept with her, and he's like, no, like I just like we're on a dating app, we talked, but nothing really happened. And so his superior is like, well, like, can you be objective about this case? And the guy's like, well, yeah, of course. It's like, well, then, like, you're still on the case. Because the guy was, like, thinking, like, well, is there a possibility that I could probably be thrown off this case? And she was like, no, everything's fine. So we eventually are to find that like Rashawn is going through and trying to find any thing that would be tied to Nick. And so Rashawn is to go to this bar and to ask the bartender, like, hey, like, how far do your tapes go back? So Nick is to go to this bar to eventually find this videotape of Nick being at this bar. And so Nick evidently was to have a fight with the guy at this bar. And so all of a sudden, Rashawn is to want the tape of this thing, and this bar guy is like, are you serious? Like, I don't, like, there isn't an extra tape of this. So Rashawn eventually is to just coincidentally, luckily, just thumb through the right social media stuff, because it seems like they're combing through everything to find any connection to Nick. And so Rashawn, at the end of this episode, is to go on and find this one picture that connects with the guy at the bar. And so eventually it seems that we find out that Sophie had some connection with the guy that Nick had fought in this bar, maybe assuming that Sophie was cheating, and maybe there's some motive here to get this 5 million view thing done. But I'm assuming once we go through that in the following whatever episode and we find this guy and think that he's the culprit of it all, it won't end up that way. So now we're to tell you what actually was to happen with Nick and how this all played out. So Roshan is to eventually continue to try and look for Nick within these locations that are to be on this app. There's a ton of people that are to continue to try and search for this guy also, and so Roshan is to continue to get certain people coming through to say, hey man, we wanted to do this for fun. And he's like, well, like, get the heck out of here, I'm police. Get out of here. Like, you're contaminating my crime scene, basically, if this is to be a crime scene. So Roshan is to eventually go to this other location and try to find where Nick is, and there's a big group of guys that are all trying to find this, and so we have this guy's like, hey man, I'm police, I'm 5-0, and everybody just runs off, a bunch of this group just runs off. So Rashawn is to eventually comb all this area to eventually find, laying in the rocks, Nick's body. Rolls him over, sees that he's completely dead, his eyes are just dead looking. And maybe he has been dead there for a while. Who knows how long this corpse has been kind of decaying or whichever. Because who knows how long this search has been because of clip of show. So Nick is to be dead now. We're to guarantee that. I'm sure there's going to be flashbacks leading up. Like, I bet there's going to be a whole story, like, probably towards very end of this season, where they're going to show, like, what had all happened to Nick to lead him up to the moment of the video. And further on past that, to where he is to have been killed, to where he has been... Like, I bet there's going to be a whole focus of episode for Nick, helping us understand every bit of every one of these moments, but it's not going to be done so quickly or as soon. So, really, I think most of this episode has probably been covered, but, like, so... Pia had gone into Roshan's car when they were going and supposedly looking for Nick, and they ended up finding a mannequin instead. And so Pia had mentioned that, like, she had her phone there, gave him the message, and because Pia was borrowing her friend's phone when Roshan was to address that Pia wasn't being exactly honest with him. And so her friend was like, hey, whenever I can get my phone back. And so Pia is just like, well, hey, like, I need this phone to track down my brother who's dead, possibly. So there's a whole conundrum of that. But Rashawn is telling to spill the beans with Pia, because it seems like Pia, like, knows a lot more information than she's really just saying. So, like, I'm kind of wondering where Roshan and Sophie are eventually going to go with all of this. So we'll kind of see what happens if there's a whole cheating dynamic that eventually goes into one of these episodes. So, with that said, I think that I got through most of this episode, but maybe there might have been a thing that slipped through the cracks. There's a lot of stuff to kind of break down here. But I think I got a gist of the episode without actually having to go through every single character and say what all their names are and whichever. So yeah, I think that's probably about it. So maybe I'll just call this an episode just because, like, really, I think, I don't know what my schedule is going to be for the very next day, but I hope to just bang out 2 episodes. To just kind of get this covered and to get this done. But who knows, especially with how things are going with certain other things. All of a sudden I'm saying, yeah, I think I'm going to get a lot of stuff done tomorrow, and then I can't get anything done, so we'll figure that out. So I am going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.